I am not a therapist, but we do talk about things like, talk to me about like the reactions that you got in your family growing up when you shared your voice. Were you in a household where like children should be seen and not heard? Or were you in a household where like everybody was loud and yelling all the time, and so you had to yell in order to be heard? That kind of stuff is really helpful in figuring out how to become more effective communicators as adults.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today's special guest is Sara Thompson. Sara Thompson is also known as That Presentation Coach, and as you listen to this podcast episode, you'll discover why. Something that Sara brings to the table and that I really love is the power of communication, of speaking, and she helps people find the ability and find the tools to speak with confidence and authenticity. So I'm really happy to be presenting That Presentation Coach to all of you on this podcast episode. And before we go further and start the interview, I wanted to share that if you are enjoying listening to the Truth That Heals podcast, please give a like, a subscribe, a follow, a rating if this is on a podcast platform. And also, if you would like to help this channel go a little bit further, you can always go to my link, buymeacoffee.com/truththath7. So without any more further ado, please enjoy this podcast episode with That Presentation Coach, Sara Thompson. Sara, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm excited too because you're a presentation coach and you have this great positive energy and you're helping people, and you've been doing it for a while, helping people find their authenticity, but also finding the confidence to speak in public and to do even more than just speaking. Also, you're helping people with things like leadership, and I think that's just awesome what you're doing, and I can't wait to get into it.
Well, thank you. I'm excited.
Well, the first part of the interview, I always like to get to know the guest a bit better. So I wanted to ask you, where did your journey start when it comes to helping people find their voices?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this in prepping for this this episode. I've been thinking a lot about this, and for a long time I really felt like my journey didn't make a whole lot of sense. But now that I'm here, once I started kind of leaning into the presentation coaching, then it became really clear of, oh, this is how this makes sense. So from a little kid, I was dramatic and expressive and all of those things. I grew up doing community theater and school theater, and then went to college thinking that I wanted to be an actor. And then it sort of, over a couple of years, it became clear that the actor's life is not an easy life. And it's a life that's sort of just full of disappointment and judgment, and you're always judged by what you look like and all this kind of stuff. And so I finally decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do. But I had a mentor. From a little kid, for some reason, I decided I liked Shakespeare. And I had started taking Shakespeare courses in college. And my mentor, Dr. Russ McDonald, who has since passed away, but he said to me one day when I was like a junior, I think, he was like, "Sara, why don't you go to grad school for Shakespeare?" And I had never really thought about it as an option before. But then once that ball got rolling, it rolled well down the hill. So after college, I moved to Stratford-upon-Avon in England, which is where Shakespeare's from, and that was pretty cool. And I sort of hung out and had a great time for about 4 years. I did my master's degree. I theoretically started some other research projects, but really it was kind of my wildness. But I was, in my mid-20s instead of high school. And so eventually it became clear that like I needed to come home. What's the next obvious step to me was a PhD. And when I was thinking about the options, it was between an English literature PhD or a theater history PhD. And eventually I decided that theater was more my thing. So then I'm doing the
Mhm.
theater history PhD, and very quickly I realized that I did not want to be a college professor. Um, I mean, the whole landscape of universities and university life is changing dramatically and continues to do so. But B, I was finding that I was feeling really guilty for doing anything fun, simply because when you're an academic, you could always be doing research. You could always be writing. You could always be reading something for your research. And I decided that that really wasn't the path that I wanted. So I started to think about doing nonprofit work instead. I've always been interested in topics of sort of justice and fairness and helping people. And when I mean, sort of the beauty of the work that I do, I think, is kind of how random things seem, but also great. I eventually, in order to finish writing the dissertation, moved back to North Carolina. Um, was living with my parents and decided to start working out of a co-working space to write the dissertation. And then just made friends there, kept doing my stuff. I finished the degree just because at that point I had spent so much time and money and effort. And it was really like so much of my identity as a person became wrapped up in Dr. Sara Thompson. So I finished that stuff up, and then through that process in that co-working space met someone who worked for Habitat for Humanity of North Carolina. um, and they were looking for a communications person, and I was like, I could do that. So started there, and then while in that process was when I started coaching individuals in public speaking and presentation skills. While doing the PhD, I had that's when I first taught classes on this, and it was the kind of thing where they needed somebody to teach these classes. It was a general education requirement
Mhm.
offered through the theater department. And I was like, yeah, sure. I can tell some kids how to put together a PowerPoint. Yeah. Um, and then kind of the realization part came in the first semester that I taught that class, because it became very clear that this was not just about like PowerPoint presentations and how you structure your argument. So much of it was about confidence and being comfortable being authentically yourself. And the drastic change that I was seeing in my students from the first day of class to the last day of the semester was so moving and so just incredible to be a part of and to feel a small part of. And it was to me really simple, and we'll talk more about this later, I'm sure, just really simple changes in mindset and thought process that can result in these sorts of shifts.
Mhm.
Um, so again, I taught that for, I don't know, 8 terms or something at the University of Maryland. Because like once I started, I was just like, yes, I love this. This is what I love to do, but never thought about it as a career. Um, so then started coaching on the side when I was working for this nonprofit, and very quickly was like, man, if this could be my job, if I could be self-employed, helping people do this kind of work, that's the dream. That and that was what made my kind of weird theater slash Shakespeare slash PhD slash nonprofit kind of path make sense to me. Because it does. It feels like all these different pieces have kind of fallen together into place to get me here doing work that I'm really passionate about.
No, I wanted to go back, and you mentioned a mentor. You even mentioned his name, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, my question is, during that time, if you did not have the mentor to kind of give you a bit of guidance,
Mhm.
what do you think you'd be doing? What do you think you would have pursued instead?
Oh man, Ryan, that's a huge, crazy question because I truly don't have any idea. Like it really at the time seemed like theater was it. And then through kind of my love for Russ, like the way he made Shakespeare come alive in that way. Um, and then also presented Shakespeare as a possible path. I think that was the other thing, was like I hadn't really thought about being an academic until he sort of mentioned it. Um, so I don't know what I would be doing otherwise. Maybe I would have become a lawyer or something, or I just don't know. Um, hmm. I've literally never thought about that before, so thank you.
No. Well, so I guess I can go on to the next question, and that is, you have this now. You are known as the presentation coach. Can you share us that story on how you got the name? Because getting a name is very important when starting your business, starting your work. How'd you get the name that presentation coach?
So I went back and on about it and was thinking a little bit about kind of branding and um, how I was going to market myself and stuff like that. When I originally started coaching in, as kind of a side gig while I was doing the nonprofit stuff, that I named that company Oak City Public Speaking, because Raleigh, North Carolina is known as the Oak City where I live. And at the time I was just seeing clients in Raleigh for the most
Mhm.
part, because the thought had never occurred to me that this work could be done any other way than in person. So then, Ryan, I don't know if you heard about it, but there was a pandemic. Made
Yeah.
all of those plans go
Mhm.
out the window. Um, and so I started to kind of move things onto Zoom and started getting clients from all across the country. And I just sort of thought to myself, Oak City public speaking doesn't make sense to anybody who doesn't live in Raleigh. So that's when I started thinking through other options and throwing all kinds of stuff at the wall and Googling to see what was already out there, what wasn't already out there, what other people were doing. Lots of people just use their name, which is great, but I did want something that made it very clear right off the bat what I do. And I had seen something, um, I don't know, that presentation coach also is a little bit cheeky.
Mhm.
So it feels a little bit um, silly and fun and irreverent in some ways, just because to me it's like, oh, I'm Sara, I'm that presentation coach, or that kind of thing. And yeah, I just sort of tried it on for a while, and it seemed like it fit. The only downside to it is that presentation is really long, and sometimes it's easy to misspell it if you're entering it into trying to enter it into Instagram to find me. But otherwise, so far that has not proven to be a super difficult challenge to overcome. But yeah, I like it. I feel like it suits my personality. It yeah, and is expressive but also explanatory, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I've checked your website, and something that I caught my attention was you mentioned there about helping people find their voices. You're helping people find also authenticity and confidence. Can you help us define, or what is your definition of authenticity, and what is your definition of confidence?
Hmm. The the authenticity piece is kind of the most amorphous piece of what I do and what I do when I work with people. And one of the biggest things, the confidence and the authenticity are so closely connected because my clients have to be confident in who they are. They have to know who they are in order to feel comfortable sharing it with others and showing themselves to others. To me, when it comes to authenticity in public speaking, my biggest goal with folks is to make it clear to them. My cat is joining us now. Okay. For me, authenticity, the goal of authenticity when I'm working with clients is making them realize that they don't have to present like anybody else. When we think historically about what a leader looks and sounds like, there's a very specific image often that comes into our heads, and that truly was the case until 50, 60, 70 years ago. um, we have historically had white male leaders, but now things theoretically are moving more towards having a more diverse pool of leadership. And so talking to my clients and telling them that the things that are special about you, the things that are different about you, the stuff that maybe you've always felt self-conscious about is actually what is going to make you stand out and be interesting and be memorable. um, Being authentically yourself can be like leaning into your sense of humor or your vulnerability, or I have wacky different pairs of glasses that I like to wear. I love a big gaudy earring. And so being willing to step out in that rather than just wearing the same beige suit that everybody else might have or something like that. So that's part of it. And that authenticity, accepting your difference, accepting that you're not going to be able to convincingly sound like anybody other than you, and that that's okay, that's an asset, is a huge part of building up the confidence piece. Because a lot of times people come in with low confidence on presenting and public speaking because they aren't what they've always seen. We talk about that a lot now, right? How visibility, seeing somebody who looks like you in a position of power, in a position, in a leadership position, makes it feel like it's possible for you. And a lot of my clients come in and haven't necessarily had leaders that look and sound like them. So working towards helping them understand what about them makes them special and makes them them, and then building that up in them as a source of confidence. So confidence is that comfort of I know who I am. I know, and it's multifaceted with presenting because it's A, I know who I am and I'm comfortable with that. But B, it's also I know my material and I'm comfortable with that. And so those are the two things that really are the key to confidence as a presenter. And that's what I work with folks on. The other kind of the third prong of what I work on is preparation. And the preparation, then feeds in obviously to the confidence and the authenticity. But the other piece of authenticity that I feel like you and maybe your listeners would be interested in is this approach thinking about presence. There's a woman named Patsy Rodenberg who is a vocal teacher at I think the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. And I apologize if I'm wrong. And she wrote this book called, it's got two different titles. One's the UK title, one's the US title. But one is Presence and the other is called The Second Circle. And it's kind of a guidebook for folks. It helps with vocal performance, but it also the reason she wrote the book was that she was sitting in order to get into these acting schools, people have to come in and audition. And she was sitting there with her colleagues and, the other folks on faculty, and potential students would come in and they'd do their monologues and then they'd walk off stage. And the faculty would look at each other and they'd be like, oh, yeah, yeah, she's got it. She's got it. Yeah. And then somebody else would come on and he'd do his thing and whatever. And they'd be like, he just doesn't have it. And finally, Patsy was like, what is it? She was like, I know what it means. Logically, I know what it means, but how would I explain that to somebody else? And how would I teach it? Is it something that people can learn? And so she kind of analyzed and thought through all of these different things and came to the conclusion that it's about presence. It's about being present in the moment with your audience. And she came up with the 3 circles. So the first circle is, if we think about it I'm gonna say it's the introverted circle, but we know that that's not true because we know
Mhm.
that introverts aren't, just necessarily shy, quiet folks. I'm an introvert, but you've got the first circle, which we might think of as introverts. And in that case, your energy is focused inwards. You're, and we all are in first circle a lot, right? Like when we're on our phones or reading a book or whatever. And then the third circle is the opposite end of that spectrum. The third circle we might think of as like used car salesman energy, where they're just like they are pushing that energy out into the world and they don't care what they're getting back. But then the second circle, that's the one. That's the one that we aim for because that's where presence lives. And with the second circle, we are giving and receiving energy. We are sharing ourselves authentically with others, but we are also opening ourselves up to accepting the energy and the feedback that our audience is giving us. And there are some people that are just naturally fantastic at second circle for a variety of reasons. Who knows? If we think about our big superstars, I often use Dolly Parton as an example of somebody who
Oh
is
yeah.
just good at the second circle. Like she just you feel like Dolly Parton is talking to you, no matter
Mhm.
where you are or how many other people are there. And that's just this beautiful special gift that she has. But if we think about Dolly Parton, that gift is grounded in authenticity about who she is, where she's come from, the fact that she's had a lot of plastic surgery and all that kind of stuff. Like owning her specialness is one of the key factors that makes her able to be present with her audiences. So that was a really long answer.
No, no. So okay, so first circle is
Sort of your energy is directed inwards. You're not paying a whole lot
okay.
of attention to folks around you. Third circle is pushing energy out into the world regardless of what people are giving back to you. And then second circle is that in between of I'm giving energy, but I'm also accepting the energy of others. So think it's kind of like being in a flow state. When we think of athletes who afterwards they're like, "Oh, how did you make that catch?" And the athlete's like, I really don't know. I mean, I was just in the zone.
Mhm.
Like in the zone is presence. Is like I am just here right now in this moment and other stuff that's not involved in this is out. Like I'm not thinking about what I need to pick up at the grocery store.
So you as as that presentation coach, it's not just classes on how to speak. You're also having a science behind all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I Brian, I'm a big old nerd. I have a PhD in theater. Like I'm a nerd. And so the way that I approach things is that combination of kind of like the woo woo presentation, like
Mhm.
presence, energy, we're giving and receiving energy. But I also focus a lot on the brain and what our brains are perceiving as threats. One of the first things I do with clients who are coming to me with a lack of confidence is we talk through that stress response that your brain initiates when we perceive a threat. And we try to explore like, A, what's the function of that? Because the function is to keep you safe.
Mhm.
And if you can accept that, that makes it easier to move past it and not beat yourself up about it. But the other thing that we talk through is like being aware that things like your heart pounding, feeling nauseous, the embarrassing armpit sweat, like all of that stuff is a physiological response. It's your body trying to keep you safe. Because in the wild, that feeling comes because you've just seen a bear, and so your body's like, "All right,
Yeah.
we're about to need to do some work. So we better start sweating because we're gonna need to cool off and all this kind of stuff." Um, and once folks know that and can recognize that, then it makes when you're in the moment and you feel those things, it makes it less scary because it's not like it's some weird outside force acting on you. You understand why it's happening. And then, it's like that G.I. Joe, the more you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Um, that's what can kind of push you on the path to starting to be able to, if not control that fear, at least accept that fear and start to work with the fear. Because it's when people start beating themselves up about it, when somebody's like, why am I so nervous? Gosh, I suck at this. Like, that is not helpful. We know that guilt and shame are not helpful
Mhm.
in performance. Um, Whereas if we can start to accept ourselves and accept what our bodies and our minds are doing, then we can have progress. So I work from both of those angles, and I find that my clients are generally on a spectrum, right? Some love the more sciencey brain nerd stuff, and some really relate more towards the woo woo feelings stuff. But either way, these two things work together to kind of create a holistic change, because it isn't just like, Ryan, I can sit and teach anybody how to put together a PowerPoint and how
Mhm.
to, stand there and not fall over, or I don't know, not like cross their arms in front of themselves or something like that. That's the easy part. But in order to make somebody feel dynamic and like able to show their charisma to an audience, that's when you have to get deeper. I regularly like, I am not a therapist, but we do
Mhm.
talk about things like, talk to me about like the reactions that you got in your family growing up when you shared your voice. Were you in a household where like children should be seen and not heard? Or were you in a household where like everybody was loud and yelling all the time, and so you had to yell in order to be heard? That kind of stuff is really helpful in figuring out how to become more effective communicators as adults.
So something that I initially thought when I was going through your work was, as a presentation coach, um, I was thinking that you would have maybe your clients, your people you're working with, and say, stand in a certain way, hold your diaphragm. That's what I was thinking
Mm-hmm,
initially,
mm-hmm,
for public speaking, because there's also
mm-hmm.
a way to speak and to have posture.
Sure. Yeah.
However, I find it fascinating that you also have this. I don't want to know if it's nerdy, but I find it more fascinating
Yeah.
to have the science behind it,
Mm-hmm.
and it appears to me what I love about it is you're helping people find, and you mentioned this about Dolly Parton, that specialness that she has.
Yeah.
That's Dolly Parton.
You know it.
You
Mm-hmm.
know it, and that's what I feel that you're helping people to do, is that when they come into the room, like they're gonna know, oh, that's Ryan coming in. That's not
Mm-hmm.
somebody else. That's Ryan coming in. So I appreciate that work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I love it. And again, just like you, the first time I taught the public speaking class to college students, I had the same thought. I was like, yeah, we're going to learn how to control our diaphragms and use our breath to project our voices. And yes, we do that. But again, it was over years and years of doing this that I've learned how much it's about what's happening in our brains, in our minds, as much as what's happening in our bodies, if not more.
Now, I wanted to hear your take on this. I hadn't planned this question, but it just came during our interview, and that is the world of social media. We see so many people who are uh, starting out recording themselves, and they can be very confident, but I don't know if the authenticity is always there. I don't know if the three circles are always there, but maybe they're working on it. Like I
Yeah,
don't like to judge, but I see the growth.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on social media, the trends? Do you see positives and negatives? And can you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. I think with everything, well, and we could talk all day long about the effects of social media on our modern society and culture and the direction that America is going in and the world. But um, to me, the biggest benefit of social media is that voices that we have never heard before are starting to be heard. So when I my research when I was an academic was a lot of cultural history, and cultural history is often the stuff that we don't hear about because those folks either didn't leave a record or nobody's written about them or whatever. And so there are lots of historiography is the process of studying history, the approach that someone takes to studying history. And there are different areas of historiography that focus on those voices that we haven't heard from before. And that stuff always really appeals to me. So the benefit to me of social media, of technology, is that people who otherwise would never have a voice, perspectives that otherwise would never get heard, can now be heard by people all over the place. I think a big reason that, I mean, I can even speak for myself. I've always considered myself a very sort of progressive white woman, but certainly over the past several years, listening to people on social media, I've learned a lot about myself, about my role in systemic racism, about what work is effective work for somebody in my sort of position and with my identities can do. And so that's stuff that I'm so incredibly grateful for. The downside, obviously, is that you also get, in addition to the positive information, you also get people spreading hatred and anger and stuff like that. So, um, and I don't know that there's anything to be done about that other than like strap in for the ride. But, but when it comes to sharing our voices, something that holds a lot of people back from doing social media videos, from doing reels and lives and things like that, is that lack of confidence, is seeing yourself and being like, oh my gosh, I hate what I look like on camera. I hate what I sound like, all that kind of stuff. So it's making people nervous and it maybe holds somebody back from either sharing their unique perspective, their unique important voice, or from launching a business or expanding their business because they don't want to be on camera. One of the big things that clients come to me with is I want to start doing Instagram reels or Facebook lives or something like that. Can you help me prepare for that? Can you help me plan and feel more comfortable? And yes. And I think one of the biggest things is making the commitment to just do it. I mean, I'm sure, right, you've been doing this podcast for a really long time. I'm sure the first couple of episodes when you heard them back, and if you go back now and listen to the first episodes, I'm sure there are so many things that you would change. But understanding that and doing it anyway is really, we've got to step off the shore if we want to do anything new and interesting and exciting. And so the more clients do things, I think of it like getting reps in the gym. The more you do it, the better, the easier it is, the less uncomfortable you feel, the more used to seeing yourself on camera you are, the more you know what your voice sounds like. I'm gonna interject here with some fun, cool nerdiness.
Okay.
So the reason that your voice sounds different in your head than it does when you hear it outside, because when we hear a recording of ourselves, that's what we sound like to the rest of the world. But if we think about our heads, so air comes up through the lungs, goes through the vocal cords to produce sound. And then if we didn't have a head, the air would just sound like a kind of a whistle. But then it goes up into our head, and the head acts as like a resonator on an acoustic guitar. So, if you strum like an electric guitar that doesn't have a resonator, it doesn't sound like much. But once you add that like deep, rich body of the guitar, then it creates this new sound and produces that. So when the voice that we hear inside our head is like if we're sitting inside the resonator of the guitar, whereas the voice that we hear when we're recorded is what everybody else hears. I just think that's just so cool to think about.
You brought up about when I first started doing these podcasts, how I must have felt. And to be honest, I haven't spoken about this with my audience, I don't think.
Yeah.
but there are so many, like when I first started, that I would love to delete. But I made a promise to myself that I'm going to keep them there because I also wanted people to see my growth, that it wasn't overnight. I started off terrified, terrified to have the camera on, terrified because I said, that's not how I sound. I don't sound like that. Like what's wrong with this stupid microphone? I mean, but
Yeah.
then I you can't deny it. That's my voice, and that's me. But by also accepting that's me, I was able to move forward and all right, that's my voice. Embrace it. And
Yeah.
it's been a beautiful journey.
Yeah. And because of that, because of your willingness to embrace it, now you have what, 100 and something episodes on a variety of topics that can really reach out and help people. They're hearing important messages because you were like, you know what? I'm not going to erase it. I'm just going to keep going.
So now I wanted to ask you if you can share, in what ways have you seen your work helping change people's lives?
It's so cool, Ryan. I mean, from like working with somebody on folks who are interviewing, like looking for jobs and helping them get the job. Like when they come back and they're like, I nailed that interview. I know I did really well. Thank you so much. And then they get the job. That's a super tangible change. I have also I've had a couple of clients that really came to me. They tended to be sort of middle-aged women like later on in their careers who somehow had had like a bad boss or something had kind of just knocked their confidence. And again, they just wanted the one that I'm thinking about in particular came to me because she wanted to be able to do video like Facebook Lives for her online business, but was just terrified. And over time, and I worked with her for over a year, but over time, working with her regularly and giving her little assignments. Like she would go to these networking events locally. And I was like, okay, so at this one, you have to do this and say, tell 3 new people who you are and what you do and that kind of thing. And so, like, over time, she was kind of able to build that confidence up again that had really been shot by a bad boss at the end of her career. And so, something like that is just really moving and powerful. And that's what makes it um, really meaningful to me. I have clients who are trying to share their research in their academic fields or just regular professional lives. And that research could potentially really make a difference. I'm working right now with a client who does neuroscience research that will benefit, that has applications in helping people with Parkinson's. So that kind of, and that's really what I love so much about what I do is that every person I meet with is talking about something completely different. I have had no 2 people who study or work in the same areas. And so giving them learning from them, like I just like to learn new stuff all the time. Just think it's super interesting. But also playing a small part in them being able to step into their own power and share their perspectives and their unique work that they're doing with others is I mean that's the stuff that makes it worth doing it, right? Um yeah, and it can be super simple things of people just coming to me, I'll do big group trainings, whether it's on Zoom or in person, and somebody coming up to me afterwards or like sending me a message on LinkedIn saying, you you kind of put your finger on something. You were able to articulate a feeling that I've always had, and I always thought it was just me. And I always thought that there was nothing I could do about it. But because I heard this perspective, now I know that other people feel this and that there is stuff that can be done to change it. And again, I think that leans back into my love and background in history and theater, right? Or and literature and theater, because that's what makes the arts so special is you watch something or you hear something or you see something and it just hits just right. And you just go, I didn't know anybody else felt that. I didn't know anybody else knew what this feels like. And suddenly you don't feel so alone and you feel a lot more powerful and able to move forward and implement change.
So my last question was, how have you seen your work change people's lives?
Mm-hmm.
And my next question is, how has your work of changing people's lives changed your life?
Mm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I regularly talk to my clients and tell them things that I need to hear every day. We talk about imposter syndrome. We talk about you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. You've just got to do this thing that's really scary. And those are incredibly helpful reminders for me. Um, so that's kind of the soul change that that happens with this work. I also, if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be self-employed, I never I never would have thought like that thought had never crossed my mind. And I always felt like when you asked me earlier, what job would you have if you hadn't had your mentor? I truly don't know because when I think about I think about all kinds of other jobs and I think, yeah, I could do that. That'd be cool. Yeah. I'd be good at that. I'd like it. It'd be fine. Yeah. And so that was part of my issue as a young adult, a younger adult, was kind of looking at options and going, yeah, I could do any of those things. Sure. Whereas this is what I'm supposed to do. And kind of realizing, because when I first started coaching people on this, the the changes that I could make in people's lives by saying things that seemed so obvious to me was mind blowing. And at first I really took it for granted. I was like, oh, this is super simple. Somebody could read this in a book or figure it out for themselves or whatever. But learning and accepting that this approach and this work that I'm doing is important and is special and is different and is something that I bring something special to is really, I mean, it gives me more meaning, more purpose than I've ever felt in life. Um, I'm an overthinker. I'm prone to melancholy, as it were. um, but thinking about this work really is gives me hope and energy and joy.
And now at this part of the interview, I always ask the guest the same question, and that is, Sara, what is your truth that heals?
Mm-hmm. I think that the truth that he has healed me the most and is most helpful for my clients is that nobody is paying as much attention to me as I am paying to myself. Nobody is paying as much attention to you as you're paying to yourself. Nobody's judging us as harshly as we are judging ourselves. And when we can accept that and accept that the judgment that we're feeling is completely from within us for the most part. And again, that is not to say that that is true for every situation or every scenario or every fear that people have of being discovered or seen for who they truly are or whatever. But when it comes to public speaking and presenting, if you flub a line or you don't know the answer to a Q&A question that somebody asks, like a lot of times people will go home and they'll be like, oh man, I can't believe I did that, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And they spend 3 days just like ruminating over how they messed that up. And if you were to ask anybody in the room 5 minutes after the presentation was over, they would never even remember that it had happened. And so having that understanding gives you a freedom to, again, share your voice authentically with the world in a way that, without realizing that, if you're carrying around the kind of intense self-judgment and thinking that others around you are thinking the same things, it it's going to keep you quiet. It's going to hold you back. It's going to keep you from trying something new or sharing your ideas and your thoughts. Whereas they're not thinking about it because they're thinking about their own stuff. So that's my truth that heals.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your truth. And where can people in the audience find out more about you?
So folks can find me online. My website is thatpresentationcoach.com. I'm on social media. Instagram's the biggest one, at thatpresentationcoach. And I do one-on-one individual coaching. I also do group coaching, trainings for large companies, or then those can be one-offs or continuing kind of a series of learning workshops and stuff like that. So, and I am open for folks to reach out. I would love to hear from people and find out what questions they have for me.
Awesome. So I'll be leaving all your information in the show notes. So listeners, you can go and check that out. And Sarah, usually I end it here, but I have a little bonus round question. Are you ready?
Oh, that's exciting.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, because you mentioned that you have a overthinking mind at times, as well as your love for Shakespeare. So my bonus question is, do you have a favorite and or least favorite Shakespearean film adaptation?
Ooh, that wasn't the direction I thought you were going. Okay. Oh, what a good question. Okay. I mean, the favorite in my heart, like the one that really probably made me fall in love with Shakespeare when I was a teenager, is the Kenneth Branagh Much Ado About Nothing from the early 90s. It's Kenneth Branagh, it's Emma Thompson. Keanu Reeves is in it. He's terrible at Shakespeare. I think he's a lovely man, but he's really bad at Shakespeare. Denzel Washington is in it. Like, it's an amazing cast. And it's just so joyful. Like that movie begins and you're just like, I'm here for it. So that, yeah, that's my favorite. In general, if people are gonna do something creative and fun with Shakespeare, I'm open to it. To me, that's how we keep Shakespeare relevant and interesting, is to try new things and play around with it. Um, one of the more See, Ryan, you're gonna get me on. I'm gonna go off on a tangent. This is like
Go
asking,
go ahead. This is your truth.
um, again, as a teenager, like the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet came out. Lots of people I know and love have lots of feelings and opinions about that movie. I don't really care. I think if it got people interested in Shakespeare, cool. If they liked seeing Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, awesome. Um, yeah, and also things like 10 Things I Hate About You, which are sort of Taming of the Shrew, but like put through a teen rom-com lens. Stuff like that's cool. Like, yeah, play with it. Who cares? Shakespeare's not here anymore. Let's make this relevant and alive.
So now I feel like I need to go and do my Shakespeare research because I've only read Romeo and Juliet and I think Hamlet or something. But
Okay.
now I feel like, Ryan, you need to go sit down, get a book, and start reading and watch the movies.
Yes, but also, and this is what I say to people, it's basically a different language. We get tricked into it because we're like, oh, this is English. Why don't I understand it? Why isn't it easy to follow? Yada, yada, yada. And so we write it off. But if you approach it as, I'm working through this thing that's in a different, because it's different language. it's early modern English rather than modern English, which is what we speak. So giving yourself that permission and understanding that and not getting mad or frustrated because you don't get everything right away, and accepting that as part of the process.
Thank you so much, Sara. And to the listeners, go again, check out the show notes, find out more about Sara there, and check out her website. And Sara, thank you so much for being here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you, Ryan.